Captain Veltar was having what humans might call a very bad day. He sat in his command chair aboard the Hegemony patrol cruiser Dominion's Fist, sipping his morning stim cuff and reviewing routine patrol reports when his scanner officer suddenly yelped in surprise. The poor creature's tentacles went rigid with shock, and Veltar nearly dropped his drink when he saw the sensor readings. They're materializing from hyperspace with all the casual confidence of a ship returning from a grocery run, was the human vessel use Wanderer. This should have been impossible for several very good reasons. First, the ship had disappeared 3 years ago when it foolishly ventured into the Crimson Nebula, a region of space so dangerous that even Hegemony warships gave it a wide berth. Second, nothing that entered the Crimson Nebula ever came back out. The area was a graveyard of ships from a dozen different civilizations, all of whom had learned too late that some parts of the galaxy were better left unexplored. But here was the Wanderer, looking very much not destroyed. In fact, it looked disturbingly healthy. The ship's hull had taken on a strange, shimmering quality that reminded Veltar of oil floating on water. The surface seemed to shift and flow in ways that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on it. His optical sensors were designed to handle everything from solar flares to quantum explosions. But something about this human ship made them ache in ways he didn't know were possible. The energy readings coming from the vessel were even more troubling. Veltar had been patrolling space for 40 standard years and had seen every type of power signature in the known galaxy. He could identify a Zoraxian fusion core from 3 light-years away and could tell the difference between illegal plasma weapons and legal ones just by looking at sensor data. But whatever was powering the Wanderer now was completely unknown. To him, the patterns dancing across his displays seemed to mock everything he thought he knew about physics. When Veltar opened a communication channel, he expected one of two things: either complete silence from a dead ship, somehow still moving through space, or the desperate pleas of survivors who had somehow managed to stay alive in the most hostile region of the galaxy for 3 years. What he definitely did not expect was Captain Kim's voice, bright and cheerful, as if she was calling to chat with an old friend. "Hey there, Hegemony patrol ship," came her voice through the speakers, carrying that distinctly human quality of finding everything slightly amusing. "Anyone out there need some premium antimatter? We've got plenty to spare. Oh, and sorry we're late to the party." Traffic in the nebula was absolutely crazy. Veltar's mandibles clicked together in confusion. Premium antimatter? Late to what? Party. This human was talking as if she had just returned from a successful trading mission instead of emerging from what everyone knew: a certain death. His communications officer, a nervous creature named Zixtel, looked at him with all 4 eyes wide with confusion. The captain's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. For the past 3 years, the Hegemony had been systematically dismantling human colonies across this sector of space. It had been almost disappointingly easy. Human technology was laughably primitive compared to Hegemony weapons. Their ships were slow, their weapons were weak, and their defensive systems might as well have been made of paper. The Hegemony High Command had been confident that Earth and its scattered colonies posed no real threat to their expanding empire. That confidence had seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. Humans had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel and were still using chemical rockets for some of their space missions. They had no significant military fleet, no advanced weapons technology, and no political unity to speak of. When the UES Wanderer had disappeared into the Crimson Nebula, most Hegemony strategists had simply crossed one more human vessel off their very short list of potential threats. But now, looking at the sensor readings from this impossible ship, Veltar felt a cold not forming in his stomach. The energy signatures he was seeing suggested technology that was not just advanced beyond human capabilities, but advanced beyond Hegemony capabilities as well. Whatever had happened to the Wanderer in the Crimson Nebula, it had not been destroyed. It had been transformed. His claws scratched nervously against the armrest of his command chair as a terrible thought occurred to him. What if the Hegemony's assessment of human capabilities had been completely wrong? What if, while they had been Crushing defenseless colonies and patting themselves on the back for their easy victories, the humans had been developing something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Wanderer hung in space before them, its hull continuing to shimmer with that unsettling, physics-deafing quality. Captain Kim's cheerful voice still echoed in the bridge as she waited for a response to her offer of premium antimatter. Velta realized that this moment might be remembered as the beginning of something much larger, a goal, and more dangerous than a simple patrol encounter. Admiral Morkish had been looking forward to this meeting all week. The most powerful military commander. In the Third Hegemony Fleet, he was used to beings cowering before him, begging for mercy, or trying to buy their way out of trouble with pathetic bribes. The thought of interrogating a handful of human survivors who had somehow stumbled out of the Crimson Nebula seemed like it might provide some entertainment. During an otherwise boring patrol cycle, the Admiral's ship docked at Kepler Station with all the ceremony his rank demanded. His personal guard of 12 elite warriors flanked him as he marched through the corridors toward the interrogation facility. He was already planning how he would break these humans, how he would extract every detail about what they had seen in the nebula before disposing of them. The hegemony had protocols for dealing with survivors from restricted areas, and none of those protocols ended well for the survivors. But when the doors to the briefing room slid open, Morkish stopped, dead in his tracks. The sterile, intimidating interrogation chamber he had requested was gone. In its place was something that looked like it belonged in a completely different universe. The harsh fluorescent lighting had been replaced with warm, golden illumination that somehow made the entire room feel cozy. The cold metal walls were now covered with what appeared to be colorful fabric hangings that depicted scenes of various alien worlds living in harmony. Most shocking of all, the furniture was completely wrong. Instead of the traditional interrogation, set up with a single chair under a spotlight, facing a panel of questioners, there was a circle of comfortable-looking chairs arranged around a low table. On that table sat a collection of items that made no sense in a military context. Small plates of what appeared to be food, cups of steaming liquid, and even some kind of flowering plant in a decorative pot. Captain Kim stood in the center of this transformed space, wearing a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see him. She was a small human, unremarkable in most ways, but there was something about her presence that filled the room. She moved with easy confidence, like someone who was exactly where they belonged, doing exactly what they were meant to be doing. "Admiral Morkish," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Thank you so much for coming. I've set up what we humans call a friendship circle. I thought it might be more comfortable than those awful interrogation setups. Please, have a seat. Wherever you like." The Admiral's personal guard shifted nervously, unsure how to respond to this completely unexpected situation. Morkish himself felt off balance in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. This was not how meetings with defeated enemies were supposed to go. Where was the fear? Where was the desperate pleading for mercy? "What is that smell?" asked Commander Tekfar, the Admiral's second-in-command, his nose twitching with curiosity. Kim's smile grew even brighter. "Oh, that's coffee. Real Earth coffee. I managed to bring some back with us. Would you like to try some? I promise it's much better than that synthetic stimcuff you guys drink." The aroma was indeed incredible. It was rich and complex in ways that made the standard military rations seem like flavored cardboard. Several of the hegemony officers found themselves leaning forward slightly, drawn by the enticing scent despite their training. Admiral Morkish forced himself to focus. This human was clearly trying some kind of psychological manipulation, attempting to throw him off guard with unexpected hospitality. Well, he had dealt with far more sophisticated enemies than this. He would play along for a moment, let her think she was clever, and then crush her spirit with the reality of her situation. "Enough games," he said, taking a seat in one of the chairs that was, annoyingly, extremely comfortable. "You will tell me exactly what happened in the Crimson Nebula, and then you will submit to hegemony authority like the primitive creatures you are." Kim poured herself a cup of coffee and settled into the chair across from him with the relaxed posture of someone about to discuss weekend plans with a friend. "Actually, Admiral, I think you have this backwards. We're not here to submit to anyone. We're here to discuss the terms of our agreement." "Agreement?" Morkish's voice rose in disbelief. You are in no position to negotiate anything. Your species is barely capable of interstellar flight. Your colonies are in ruins. Your military is a joke. What possible leverage do you think you possess?" Captain Kim took a sip of her coffee and set the cup down with deliberate care. Her expression remained pleasant, but something had changed in her eyes. There was a depth there that hadn't been present before, as if she was looking at something far beyond the walls of the room. She said conversationally, "I suppose we should start with the colonies. We'd like those back, of course. All of them, fully restored, with reparations for the 3-year inconvenience you caused our people. We're also going to need formal recognition of humanity's new status as galactic peacekeepers. Think of us as the universe's new customer service department." The sheer audacity of the statement left Morkish speechless for a moment. When he found his voice again, he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Peacekeepers? You delusional little ape. Your entire species couldn't fight off a hegemony patrol cruiser, let alone enforce peace in the galaxy." Kim smiled again, and this time there was something almost pitying in her expression. "Oh, Admiral, I think you're going to find that things have changed quite a bit since we've been away. You see, we've made some new friends during our time in the Crimson Nebula. Would you like to meet them?" Before Morkish could respond, Kim touched something on her wrist, and the room filled with a soft humming sound. A holographic projector activated, filling the space above the table with images that made every hegemony officer in the room gasp in recognition and terror. The ships shown in the hologram were unlike anything in the current galaxy, yet every military officer worth his rank knew the stories. These were vessels of impossible beauty and complexity, their hulls flowing like liquid metal, their proportions defying conventional ship design. They were the legendary ships of the architects, the ancient race that had supposedly built the hyperspace network that connected the galaxy before vanishing without a trace eons ago. "Impossible," whispered Commander Tekfar. "The architects are extinct. They've been gone for millions of years." Kim's smile was radiant now. "Extinct? Oh no, they're very much alive. They've just been waiting for the right moment to come back. And apparently they find humans delightfully unpredictable." 3 years ago, the U.S. Wanderer was barely holding together as it drifted into the most dangerous region of known space. Captain Kim remembered every detail of that day with crystal clarity, though at the time she had been certain it would be the last day she would remember anything at all. The ship's engines were failing. Her life support systems were running on backup power, and they had enough food for maybe 2 weeks if they were very careful with rationing. The Crimson Nebula stretched out before them like a massive graveyard, filled with the twisted remains of ships from dozens of different civilizations. Some of the wrecks were so old that their metal had taken on strange colors from exposure to the nebula's exotic radiation. Others were recent enough that Kim could still make out the markings of their original owners. What made the Crimson Nebula so deadly was not just the radiation or the gravitational anomalies that could crush a ship in seconds. This is the way. Space itself seemed to behave differently here. Navigation instruments would spin wildly, pointing in directions that did not exist. Time moved in stuttering, unpredictable ways. Crew members would start sentences and finish them hours later, convinced that only seconds had passed. Some areas of the nebula seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, creating visual paradoxes that drove people insane if they looked too long. Captain Kim had ordered her crew to prepare for the worst. They had exhausted every other option in their desperate flight from hegemony forces, and the nebula represented their only chance of escape, even if that escape meant death. At least they would die free rather than in some hegemony prison camp. Commander Park, or Second Command, and the ship's chief engineer had been working frantically to keep their systems running for just a few more hours. He was covered in grease and sweat, his usually neat uniform torn and stained from crawling through maintenance tunnels. Despite their desperate situation, Park had not lost his sense of humor, something that Kim had always appreciated about him. "Captain," he had said, wiping his hands on a rag as he emerged from behind a control panel, "I have good news and bad news about our current situation." "Give me the bad news first," Kim had replied, though she was smiling despite everything. Park's ability to find something funny in even the most Terrible circumstances had kept the crew's spirits up during their long flight. The bad news is that we are definitely going to die in this cosmic horror show of a nebula. Our engines will fail completely in about 6 hours. Our life support will last maybe 12 hours after that, and we are surrounded by gravitational anomalies that could turn us into subatomic particles at any moment. And the good news? Park had grinned at her with the kind of manic cheerfulness that only humans seemed capable of in the face of certain doom. The good news is that this is definitely the universe's worst camping trip, and we are going to have the most unique death story in human history. I mean, how many people can say they died in a place where the laws of physics go to have nervous breakdowns? It was at that exact moment that something impossible happened. The twisted space around them suddenly became calm. The radiation levels dropped to almost nothing. The gravitational anomalies smoothed out into gentle currents that seemed to guide their ship toward the center of the nebula, rather than tear it apart. And then they heard the voice. It did not come through their communication systems. It seemed to speak directly into their minds, but not in words. Instead, it communicated in concepts and emotions that somehow translated themselves into language their human brains could understand. How curious, the voice had said. And there was something almost like amusement in it. Another species has found us, but this one is ... different. Captain Kim had looked around the bridge at her crew, seeing her own confusion reflected in their faces. Who is that? What do you want? We are what your species would call the architects, though that is not what we call ourselves. We built the network of hyperspace routes that connects your galaxy long before any of the current civilizations existed. We have been waiting here, watching, studying the patterns of the younger races. Commander Park, with his usual inability to be intimidated by anything, had raised his hand like a student in a classroom. Excuse me, cosmic entity. But are you the ones responsible for this whole death trap nebula situation? Because if so, I have some complaints about your interior decorating choices. There was a pause that seemed to last for hours, though the ship's chronometers insisted that only seconds had passed. Then something extraordinary happened. The presence in there. Minds began to laugh. It was not human laughter, but it was unmistakably the sound of joy, of genuine amusement at something unexpected and delightful. In all the millennia we have observed the younger races, the voice said, none have ever responded to their first contact with beings of pure consciousness by making jokes. Most species either beg for power, try to worship us, or attempt to steal our technology. You are the first to complain about our decorating choices. What followed was the most surreal conversation in human history. The architects, it turned out, had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. They existed as pure thought, as living mathematics that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. They had created the Crimson Nebula as a test, a puzzle that only the most advanced civilizations might solve. But over the eons, they'd grown bored watching species after species follow the same predictable patterns. Every race that found them wanted the same things: ultimate weapons, accusing immortality, the power to conquer their enemies. The conversations were always identical, always boring, always ending with the younger species either being granted some small boon or being destroyed for their presumption. But humans were different. When faced with cosmic entities that existed as living equations, Commander Park had started telling them jokes. When the architects had demonstrated their ability to reshape reality by creating beautiful, impossible geometric forms in space, Lieutenant Choi had applauded and asked if they knew any magic tricks. When the beings had explained their loneliness and their desire for something new and interesting to happen in the galaxy, Captain Kim had suggested they try a hobby. The architects had been so entertained by humanity's complete refusal to take cosmic horror seriously that they had made an offer. They would share their reality-bending technology with the humans, not as masters granting favor to servants, but as partners in what they called chaos theory and practice. In exchange, humans would provide something the architects had been missing for millions of years: unpredictability, creativity, and entertainment. The humans, being human, had immediately started negotiating. Captain Kim had counteroffered to teach the architects about Earth culture, starting with poker and something called internet memes. Commander Park had promised to explain the concept of comedy shows, while Lieutenant Choi had offered to introduce them to the wonderful world of human music. The partnership that followed had been unlike anything in galactic history. Friendship between ancient cosmic entities and a species that had barely learned to leave their home planet. Admiral Morkish had heard enough. The holographic display showing ancient architect ships was clearly some kind of human trick, probably using stolen hegemony technology to create fake images. These primitive apes thought they could intimidate him with special effects and clever lighting. Well, he would show them exactly what happened to species that tried to deceive the hegemony. His face darkened to a deep purple, a sure sign among his people that violence was about to follow. The Admiral had not reached his position by being patient with upstart civilizations who thought they could play games with superior beings. He had crushed rebellions on 17 different worlds and had personally overseen the destruction of 3 entire species who had dared to challenge hegemony authority. Enough of this nonsense, he snarled, rising from his surprisingly comfortable chair. You think you can fool me with parlor tricks and fairy tales about extinct civilizations? I will show you what real power looks like.
Captain Kim looked up
from her coffee cup with the expression of someone who had just been told that rain was wet. Oh, Admiral, I really wouldn't recommend that course of action. The architects are very protective of their new friends. But Morkish was already activating his personal communication device, connecting him directly to the bridge of his flagship. Commander Dextel, this is Admiral Morkish. I want you to target the human vessel and destroy it immediately. Full plasma barrage. Maximum power. Leave nothing but space dust. Sir, are you certain? We're very close to the station, and the blast radius could execute the order immediately. Or I will find a commander who follows orders without question. Through the station's observation windows, they could see the massive hegemony battle. Cruiser Eternal Dominion turning its weapon arrays toward the small human ship. The Wanderer looked impossibly tiny next to the kilometer-long warship, like a minnow facing a shark. The hegemony vessel's plasma cannons began to glow with building energy, creating an ominous red light that reflected off the station's hull. Captain Kim sighed and shook her head sadly. Well, I tried to warn you. Buddy is not going to be happy. About this interruption, he was just getting to the good part of his show. Buddy, Admiral Morkish demanded. What are you talking about? Oh, you'll meet him in a moment. He's one of the architects who decided to come along for the ride. Fair warning, though, he's developed some very strong opinions about Earth's entertainment, and he gets grumpy when people interrupt his viewing time. The plasma barrage erupted from the hegemony ship with enough force to vaporize a small moon. Bright streams of superheated energy lanced across space toward the Wanderer, carrying death and destruction that should have reduced the human vessel to its component atoms in seconds. Instead, something impossible happened. The deadly energy struck the Wanderer's hull and simply vanished. The ship's surface began to pulse with colors that had no names, hues that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal perception. The hull itself appeared to be absorbing the energy, drinking it in like a sponge soaking up water. Captain Kim watched the light show through the observation window, still calmly sipping her coffee. Oh, that's quite pretty, though I think it needs more sparkles. Maybe some gold highlights around the edges. Admiral Morkish stared in disbelief as his most powerful weapons had absolutely no effect on the small human ship. Impossible. Those plasma cannons can destroy anything. What kind of shields do you have? Shields, Kim laughed. We don't use shields anymore. That's such old-fashioned thinking. Buddy, would you like to explain what just happened to our friend here? The ship's communication system crackled to life, but what emerged was not a normal voice. It sounded like music made of starlight, like the sound of galaxies singing in harmony. When it spoke, each word seemed to contain layers of meaning that ordinary minds could barely comprehend. Greetings, Admiral Morkish of the hegemony, the voice said, though there was a distinctly annoyed tone beneath the cosmic harmonies. I am what your limited understanding would call an architect, though Captain Kim has given me the name, Buddy. I was enjoying a particularly dramatic episode of something called Days of Our Lives, when you rudely interrupted with your primitive energy weapons. Morkish's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair. An actual architect was speaking to him, not a legend or a myth. but a real member of the species that had shaped the galaxy before his civilization had even discovered fire. "This is impossible," he whispered. "The architects are extinct. They vanished millions of years ago." Buddy's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining something very simple to a small child. "We did not vanish, Admiral. We evolved beyond the need for physical forms and chose to observe the younger races from a distance. We have been waiting for someone interesting to come along. Unfortunately, most species that find us are rather boring. They all want the same things: bigger weapons, longer lives, more power to destroy their enemies. But these humans are different," the voice continued, and now there was genuine warmth in the cosmic tones. "When they first encountered us, they did not beg for power or try to steal our technology. Instead, they offered to teach us about something called entertainment. Captain Kim introduced me to Earth television programs, and I must say, they are absolutely fascinating. The character development, the dramatic tension, the way humans can find humor in even the most serious situations, it is unlike anything we have observed in millions of years." Commander Dexto's voice came through Morkish's communicator, tinged with panic. "Admiral, something is happening to our ship. The weapons are turning around on their own. They're targeting us." Through the observation window, they could see the Hegemony battlecruiser's plasma cannons slowly rotating to point at the ship itself. But that was not the strangest part. The energy blasts that had been fired at the Wanderer were somehow traveling backward through time, returning to their source like a recording being played in reverse. "What you are witnessing," Buddy explained with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student was finally beginning to understand, "is not technology as you comprehend it. We architects learned long ago that reality is far more flexible than most species realize. What you call the laws of physics are more like suggestions that can be modified by those who understand the underlying mathematics of existence." Hegemony ships were now firing at themselves, their own weapons turned against them by forces beyond their comprehension. The crews were shouting in confusion as their instruments showed readings that violated everything they knew about cause and effect. "But how?" Morkish demanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Applied friendship," Buddy replied cheerfully. "See, Admiral, consciousness is not separate from reality. It is part of the fundamental structure of the universe. When beings choose to work together, to truly cooperate and share their unique perspectives, they can accomplish things that no individual mind could achieve alone. We architects have always known this, but we had grown lonely working by ourselves for so long. Humans, however, have a remarkable gift for forming connections with other beings. They can make friends with anyone, even mathematical concepts that happen to have developed personalities. Captain Kim and her crew did not see us as tools to be used or gods to be worshipped. They saw us as potential friends who might enjoy learning about Earth culture." The voice paused, and when it continued, there was something like contentment in the cosmic harmonies. "In exchange for friendship and entertainment, we share our understanding of reality's true nature. It is not conquest, Admiral. It is cooperation, and it is far more powerful than any weapon your empire has ever conceived." 6 months after the confrontation at Kepler Station, the galaxy had transformed in ways that most beings were still struggling to understand. What historians would eventually call the Kim Accords had officially restructured interstellar politics, though Captain Kim herself had insisted on a different name for the new arrangement. She preferred to call it the Universal Friendship Network, a term that made most traditional diplomats cringe, but somehow perfectly captured the spirit of what had actually happened. The changes were visible everywhere. Former hegemony colonies that had been strip-mined, enslaved, or abandoned were now thriving independent worlds with technology that seemed to border on magic. Buildings grew themselves from crystalline seeds that the architects had shared, creating structures that were not just functional, but beautiful in ways that took your breath away. Food production had become so efficient that starvation was now a historical curiosity, and the replicator technology that had once seemed so advanced was now considered quaint, like using a stone axe to cut wood. But perhaps the most dramatic change was in the leadership of what had once been the mighty hegemony military. Admiral Morkish, who 6 months earlier had been one of the most feared commanders in the galaxy, now held the title of Director of Interspecies Harmony. This was not a position he had sought or even wanted, but rather one that his own fleet had voted him into after what became known as the Great Attitude Adjustment. Every morning, Morkish sat in his new office aboard the renamed vessel Peaceful Coexistence, formerly the Eternal Dominion, staring at reports that his former superiors in the Hegemony High Command absolutely refused to believe. The reports described a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through something humans called cosmic group therapy, where trade agreements were negotiated over shared meals, and where the most powerful military force in known space was now primarily concerned with organizing cultural exchange programs. The morning routine had become familiar by now. Morkish would review the daily reports, each one more surreal than the last, then compose his official communications to headquarters. He had long since given up trying to make the reports sound believable. Instead, he simply documented the facts as they occurred, knowing that future historians would at least have an accurate record of how the galaxy had accidentally achieved peace through the power of friendship. Today's report was typical. The Zephyrian Empire had formally requested to join the Universal Friendship Network after their entire military had been defeated not by superior weapons, but by a human delegation that had introduced them to something called Pizza Night, the warrior culture that had spent centuries conquering. Neighboring systems had discovered that sharing food while watching Earth comedy shows was far more enjoyable than constant warfare. The Crystalline Collective, a species that communicated through harmonic resonance and had never been able to establish diplomatic relations with any other race, had somehow learned to appreciate human music. They were now requesting cultural exchange programs, and had started composing what they called friendship symphonies that could be heard across entire star systems. Most remarkably, the hegemony's own military structure had reorganized itself. From the bottom up, soldiers who had once been trained for conquest and domination were now taking courses in conflict resolution and cultural sensitivity. The military academies had added new subjects to their curricula: applied empathy, interspecies communication, and something called practical friendship theory, that was apparently based on human social dynamics. The change had not been imposed from above by some conquering force. Spreading from ship to ship and world to world as beings discovered that cooperation produced better results than competition, the architects had provided the technology and the philosophical framework. But it was the humans who had somehow made the whole thing work by treating the restructuring of galactic civilization like a massive community project. Captain Kim had become the unofficial ambassador for this new approach to interstellar relations. Her official title was Galactic Ambassador of Applied Friendship, a position that had never existed before, but somehow seemed essential now. She traveled throughout the galaxy aboard the UES Wanderer, which had been transformed into a mobile embassy that welcomed beings from every known species. The ship itself had become a marvel of cooperative engineering. Human creativity had been combined with architect technology and contributions from dozens of other species to create something that was part spacecraft, part diplomatic facility, and part traveling festival. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate beings of all sizes, from tiny insectoid species to massive gas cloud entities that had somehow learned to appreciate human humor. Buddy, the architect consciousness who had taken up residence in the ship's computer systems, had undergone his own transformation. He had become fascinated with Earth entertainment and had started writing his own comedy shows, which were broadcast throughout the galaxy to audiences who had never imagined that cosmic entities could develop such a sophisticated sense of humor. His latest series, Things My Human Friends Say, had become popular on 17 different worlds. The success of the Universal Friendship Network had attracted attention from other regions of the galaxy. Captain Kim regularly received what she called friendship applications from empires and confederations that wanted to join the new arrangement. The process was surprisingly simple. Interested parties would submit to what humans called cosmic group therapy, where conflicts were resolved through honest communication and shared experiences rather than military force. What made this approach work was humanity's unique ability to find humor in any situation, no matter how serious or threatening it might seem. When the Draconian Empire had initially refused to participate in the Friendship Network, claiming that their warrior culture was incompatible with peaceful cooperation, Commander Park had organized a comedy night where human comedians performed for Draconian audiences. The result was the first recorded instance of an entire warrior species laughing so hard they forgot why they had wanted to fight. In the first place, the food situation had also improved dramatically. One of the unexpected benefits of the arrangement was that cooperation had led to much better cuisine. Species that had been enemies for centuries discovered that their traditional foods complemented each other in amazing ways. The hegemony's former military rations, which had been notorious for their terrible taste, were replaced by meals that were prepared cooperatively by chefs from multiple worlds. As Morkish finished his daily report, he reflected on the strangest aspect of the entire situation. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior technology or military might. They had simply befriended beings so advanced that they could rewrite the laws of physics for entertainment, and then convince those beings that running a peaceful, cooperative galaxy would be more fun than the endless cycles of conquest and domination that had characterized galactic politics for millennia. The truly terrifying part, from the perspective of someone who had spent his entire career in traditional military service, was that this approach actually worked better than anything that had been tried before.